Hi guys, my name is Noel and I make ball jointed dolls. I bet you thought I never noticed you didn't watch my previous video with plaster molds. I did notice that, and for that I will bring you a lot of plaster mold making videos. However many plaster molds I will have to make, you will have to watch me make them all. Is it smart? Will you be calling me that plaster mold making person by the end of it? We'll see. The good news is I have all the complicated body parts left, so it'll at least be interesting. Except for the today's one probably. Today's is basically a squished down shin mold. I really like do-overs because I tend to do better at them. As usual, I use gloves. Also, when I'm at this mold making stage, I stock up on foil and baking paper and do everything on the sheet of one or the other or both, because it's really easy to crumple it up with all the debris that fell off your plaster molds and put a new sheet of paper or a new sheet of foil, and basically you have a clean work table at once. And we're jumping right in with our clay for the mold box. I used to use Jovi plasticine for it, and if you can find it, do so. It's extremely soft and nice to work with, and I heard it from a lot of people, so I'm not alone in the assessment. But unfortunately, I can't find it anywhere in Serbia. I have brought a tiny block of it with me, and I use it to plug in the holes and to make the body parts non-hollow, which you'll see in a sec. But for mold boxes nowadays, I use kids clay. It's extremely easy to shape the clay bed with it. The main thing is to saturate it with water enough, but not too much. And let's see how I make the mid-torso part non-hollow. Here I use white Jovi. It's not the best color when you work with plaster, which is also white, but bright colors leave a bit of a residue on plaster, which is also unfortunate, so I'd recommend using white or as pale of a color as possible. And be extremely careful not to leave any piece of it on the mold body. For that, just pack it in real tight and smooth it out like I do here. Let's put the mid-torso back into the clay bed, and here you see the non-efficient way of me preparing the said bed. I sometimes forget the easiest way to make it. Here I wasn't using my time in a smart way, but I got there. That's the main thing. My clay in this part is a bit oversaturated, but I sometimes do that so that it is more malleable, even more malleable than it needs to be. If you're interested in how I prepare clay when I take it out of the packaging, I'll make a separate and a very short video on how I do it next week, so be on the lookout for that. And as I add more form to the clay bed, putting more clay lumps in the places where the joint plug needs to be, and then inserting a tiny clay sausage to the top of the form so we could reserve this space for a pouring hole, let me say that making them both right now, when you make first half of the mold, is not strictly necessary. You can leave them be, but after you pour plaster and it hardens, you'll have to carve both out. For me personally, it's easier to spend extra few minutes in blocking the form, but I know that some people really like carving, so I feel like it's necessary to mention that it's possible. And it's up to you when to do that and how. Now let's clean the surface and mark where the mold edges need to go. Right now the clay bed is wider than necessary, so with a compass we're putting in a 2 cm offset from every edge of the sculpt. And I need to say that my plaster molds follow the same principle, all of them. I leave approximately a 2 cm margin around the sculpt so that the plaster absorbs moisture from the porcelain slab evenly, and this ensures that the wall thickness of every doll part remains uniform in porcelain. And I don't really have to think while I pour porcelain which doll part I need to hold for a bit longer as plaster is thinner for it, or which one needs to be in and out as plaster is thick and thirsty. Here's another cool thing and a bit of a secret to get a clean, even mold with clean seams every time. We know where the dividing line is. If you're unsure what it is, let me clarify that this is, in my case, graphite line that exists so the mold can open and release the sculpt without breaking it. So a lot of casters say that when you build a clay bed for the first half of the mold, the clay must stop exactly at a dividing line. And we'll push it a bit below. Why? Because it will allow us to shave a bit of the mold surface away, and I'll show you how to do that when plaster hardens. And as we're shaving it away, as we're evening out the mold huff surface, and at the same time as we're creating a crisp seam line for the second mold huff to fit, we're descending to the dividing line and not going below. A neat trick, and I use it all the time, so I'm sharing it with you. The main thing is not to go too low, otherwise you won't be able to take the master part out as it will be locked in plaster. Also, not the biggest problem, but try not to create extra problems where you don't need them. Another very important part, if you choose to block the socket plug with clay, as I mentioned before, make sure you make the edges flared, as this plug needs to be held in place by both mold parts, and a flared base is a sure way to do this, and leave a tiny sort of step between the clay plug and the actual body part. You can see here that the body part's edge is higher and the body of the plug is sort of inserted into the socket. Plaster will go there, and I'll show you why it's important when the first mold huff hardens. There is a lot of very important information ahead, so keep watching. For the mold box, I use cardboard. You already saw me do that. I fold it along the corrugation lines. That way the walls bend cleanly and keep their shape. And when I put the box together, I tried to keep the sides even. It doesn't have to be a perfect square, but it should be a true rectangle with opposite sides parallel and not slanted. A straight, even mold box helps the plaster pour evenly first. It also prevents the mold from warping as it dries, although I doubt that at this caliber of mold it can actually be warped, but just in case. And the last reason, for me personally, is the main one. It's easier to store these even square-ish forms and use them and take them out. I used to make them oblong, oval-ish, and they were a nightmare to store. Now let's fill in the edges of the form. You can make the clay bed a bit bigger compared to what you need and press the cardboard into the bed itself so that you don't have to fill in the edges like I do here. But I don't like this way of doing things, as the clay bed becomes a little bit deformed compared to what I intentionally did. So I do it this way. You don't really have to, it's just my little quirk, and it really helps me feel in control. You might ask, what are we controlling here? It's the liquid state of plaster mix. It has a tendency to escape the mold box, so to be sure it doesn't happen, we also put clay sausages around the form, and we do that on a foil sheet that we also fold like a little boat in case plaster still makes an escape, despite all our efforts. And this is how we control plaster and make it stay inside the mold box and keep our table clean. Too many times I had to clean it up, so that's the way I go now. And now let's mix plaster with water. You have to find the proportions that fit you and then pour water first. After that, I mix plaster in right next to my air purifier that I put on maximum so that I'm not breathing in the dust. And then I mix the whole thing with my hand. I used to have a mixing stick, but I lost it during the move, so we have what we have. And then I bang on the sides of my mixing cup. A lot of people have vibration table to get rid of the bubbles. I don't have one, not a big deal. And you remember the 2 centimeter rule. This stick has these 2 centimeters marked on it, and with it I measure if the mold has the thickness of 2 centimeters from the top of the master part to the top of the mold. Here goes our favorite magical moment. We pour plaster. And I covered how I measured the depth of the mold, but when I pull out the stick, it shows the thickness, which is a bit above of what I need. That is fine. In around 15 minutes, the plaster has hardened and we are demolding. Here you can see that a bit of plaster has escaped the mold box, but didn't go beyond the outer clay sausages, which is great. And now we're disassembling the box and throwing it away, as this cardboard is cheap and got stuck to the sides of our mold huff. Now let's get rid of the clay bed. Don't be alarmed that the mold surface is dirty, we'll clean it right up. For cleaning, we'll use a wash tub, a utility knife, and a piece of sanding paper. The main thing to remember here is that the first half of your mold needs to have a clean 90-degree angle where it meets the mold box. This edge becomes the support surface of the second half. The more precise you make it, the better the two halves will line up and the cleaner and tighter your final mold will be. Also, the more seamless your dull part will turn out, which is really important for porcelain. And remember, we pushed our clay a bit lower than the dividing line. Here's where we get rid of this tiny bit to make the mold surface more even. Also, I'm bringing back the little step we had between a clay plug and the edge of the body part. You can see here that it chipped when I took out the middle of his torso, and we'll also fix it right up At this stage, I refine the inside of the mold. Be extremely careful with this step. It can damage both you and your mold huff. You need to hold your knife like I do here and try to make the 90 degrees angle possible, meaning that the mold surface should be as even as possible. I'm touching the place people warn you not to touch, and this is the contact line of the cavity and the mold side. Again, this is possible because I knew I won't be able to make a 90 degrees angle, and I pushed the clay lower than the dividing line. So now I have to create a crisp, sharp angle, and I'm doing so, and this prevents any rounded or sloppy transition between the two mold huffs. And the clean, sharp cavity edge means that the seam will join perfectly between the two molds, and the cast piece will have almost no visible seam line. It's a closely guarded secret of many people, and a thing that some doll makers either don't know, or they just don't care, or they don't want to work on a new set of molds, and this is just not the way to go. Because we all know how much effort it takes to make a porcelain doll, so I'd say we must not jeopardize this effort, and we should be better about the seam management. And if you're a doll collector and you see those huge scar-like seams and the doll maker says it's impossible to get rid of them, I'd say buy something different. It might sound harsh, and I'm sorry, but it's either porcelain that doesn't like how you pour it, and we'll get to it in a different video, or it's your molds. And what happens to them with time is erosion, the plague of all plaster molds. The more you use them, the worse it is. So first dolls you take out of the molds are the best, most seamless copies. So I'd say change your molds as often as every 15, 17 dolls. 10 if you want to be better than anyone on the market. And it's quite easy too. As soon as I need to change mine, I definitely show you how to do that. But for now, let's continue with this middle of the torso. I shave off some more plaster. Again, be extremely careful with a knife. I really hope you're over 18 years old and aren't cutting yourself left and right. If not, please don't listen to me and do things differently. Probably I should have added this disclaimer in the very beginning, but well, we have what we have. Now I look at this mold huff and I want to just eat it up. It looks so yummy and so clean, but it also has some divots that are deeper, and if I cut more plaster, I will make this angle more than 90 degrees, and this is just no good, so I'll turn these into registration keys a bit later. Now let's refine the joint plug. I scrape off the chips that we saw earlier with an instrument, not with a knife, as the instrument is a little bit blunter and it allows me to be more precise. And I finish the chip elimination process with the lightest of sanding touches. And in just a second, I'll show you what you should get when you do it like this. But first, let's add some registration keys. These are the divots that will help our two mold huffs stay locked together and not slide around. And it's extremely important you don't forget them. Now let's clean the master part and put it in our finished first mold huff. And here you go, you see how the joint plug will do its job seamlessly without touching the outer edge of the mid-torso. And here we did everything to not create a seam that runs on the outer edge of the body. The seam will be on the inside and never visible, even if it's huge and scar-like. It's on the inside and no one will see it ever. Now let's add a release agent. I use silicone cream. It will help our two mold huffs not to fuse together down the line. First layer will be a bit thicker. I use a separate brush to smear it everywhere, and I go really hard to push silicone cream and as much of it as possible into the registration keys, but also I try to keep the layer of the same thickness as I put it on the outer edges. Now we'll add our joint plug back in. Don't forget to treat the back the same way we did the front. Mind the step between the outer edge of the master and the body of the plug, and we'll be able to fix it for the second mold huff the same way we did for the first one. Also, don't forget it should be as flared as its opposite, and add clay to the place where pouring hole is going to be. Now create the mold box the same way we did for the first half. Plug the holes that you're left with. You can also absolutely go overboard and make the 90 degrees angles on the outside of the first mold half if you know how to do this easily, or it is easier for you than plugging it in. Absolutely, do so. I won't be doing that. And then let's add external clay sausages. They are our heroes of today. Then put some more release agent. Be careful not to touch the master with your release agent brush. And if you did, wipe it off with a cotton swab. Otherwise, everything is going to be reflected on the mold cavity, and this is not the best look. But also, if you did and mold cavity has this smear of release agent, don't panic. It's absolutely fixable in porcelain. And now let's pour our plaster. Don't forget to check that it still has this 2 cm depth from the topmost master point. Wait 15 minutes and demold. Here again we see that plaster tried to escape, but our outer sausages kept it in, and as the first half was extremely saturated with water, it was easy to clean up its sides from the fresh plaster batch that escaped and hardened on its sides. If you're working with one half on one day and the other half in a day or so, please don't forget to put it in water and saturate it with water to the brim before pouring fresh plaster on it. I am guilty of not doing that when I was really young and didn't know what's what. And if you're interested how it should look like, go watch the previous plaster mold making video. In here, I did everything in one go, so I didn't need that. Also, let me repeat myself about being careful when it comes to knife and the cleanup. Be careful, have a steady hand, and please don't cut yourself. Also, here's the prime example when you'll need to get rid of the debris, and it will be as easy as folding a sheet of paper because you worked on one. Now let's take out the clay joint plug, then this piece of clay that reserved for us the place for a pouring hole, and let's try to take the mold halves apart. As you see, it was easy as we've applied a lot of release agent. Now to the cleanup of the joint plug seam. You can see here that the master stayed in the second fresh half because this plug business needs a cleanup, and it has locked the dull part in, and as soon as we clean it, we are able to take the master right out. Here's how the two halves fit together. I cleaned the second half's plug side off camera. I did it the same way I did for the first half, nothing new there, with the lightest of touches of sanding paper and a little bit of an instrument scraping. And now let's pour ourselves a plaster joint plug. The form itself is huge, so don't be stingy when it comes both to the release agent. Do the 2-layer method and mix enough plaster for it so that you could over pour it. I mean, not pour it to the brim, but pour it over the top. You need the same proportions of the plaster for your plug as you had for the mold body, and you need to respect this 2 cm rule. Otherwise, it will be a disaster when the mold body sucks out the water with one speed and the plug with the other, and your body part thickness is going to be different and you're going to get cracks, and we don't want that. Again, wait 15 minutes and cut off the excess. As this is going to be the bottom of our mold, please make sure it's even and the mold can stand on its bottom. And if you've applied the release agent as liberally as I did, you'll be able to open the mold quite easily. Although, let me come back to the release agent for a sec while I try to take out the plug. If you put too much of it, it will create you a seam. If you don't put enough of it, it will chip your mold and can even damage your master because it's going to be trapped in plaster. So please test it first and or do it the way I did. Apply liberally, wait for 3 to 5 minutes, let your solid plaster suck it in a bit, even this layer out. It should look a bit dry and patchy, and then apply the release agent for the second time with a thinner layer. And congrats! Now we have a ready mold for the middle of the body. I'm glad I managed to talk about the seams more this time around, and I'm extremely happy we're one step closer to this boy in porcelain. If you liked how I explained things this time around, click a like button, subscribe to the channel, it really helps. Write me some comments, and please consider supporting me on Patreon like these rays of sunshine do. Thank you guys for being here. See you, bye!